Welcome to the MEDtalkx podcast YouTube channel, where we'll be discussing a range of topics with a focus on health and well-being. You'll be joined by myself, Mehran, and my friend Fahim, along with expert guests, to discuss things further. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and of course subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another show of MEDtalkx. This is a regular show which is being broadcasted live on Pendle Radio, Awaz 103.1 FM. We've got quite a stellar lineup today, haven't we, Brother Fahim?
Yes, welcome to everyone. A very good afternoon and Ramadan Mubarak to you, Mehran, and to our guests. We have got Dina Begum today. Hello, Dina.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It's our pleasure. Dina Begum is a cookbook author and writer who is passionate about championing the recipes and food culture of Bangladesh, which is underrepresented internationally. She's a member of the Guild of Food Writers, and her debut cookbook, The Brick Lane Cookbook, celebrates the diverse food culture of London's iconic Brick Lane. Dina is a leading voice in Bangladeshi food and is increasingly called upon to write for nationwide publications. It's a real pleasure to have you today, Dina. And I know you have to leave shortly at our break, so we will focus on you for the first part. But we also have a second guest, Dr. Shazli Azmi. Hello, Shazli.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Dr. Azmi studied at the University of Manchester Medical School, where she graduated in 2005. She completed specialist training in diabetes and endocrinology and general internal medicine in the Northwest Deanery in 2018. She obtained a PhD from Manchester University in 2017. Her thesis focused on longitudinal studies in metabolic neuropathies, development of imaging biomarkers. Sounds very complicated, but I'm sure we can discuss that later.
You've practiced that well, Fahim.
You've done your research. Fantastic. You've actually...
Great. Back to you, Mehran.
You've said more than I was going to say. And, Shazli's actually comes quite close to home. She's, she actually happens to be my sister-in-law. So I've got to be extra nice, and she's got to be extra nice to me. But thanks for coming on. But clearly the reason why she's on is she's an expert in the field. She's done lots of talks, lots of engagement events on the topic. So this is something that we'll touch towards the latter half of the show. But a couple of formalities. There are two numbers. So if the listeners want to ask any questions, there are two numbers for you to get in touch with the Pendle Radio team. So that's 01282 723 455, and the mobile number is 07522 723 455. So just for everyone to be aware that the information provided on the show is just for general advice and better understanding of the various health topics that we discuss. We will try to address any of the questions asked, but if it's about specific areas about your management, then obviously please speak to your GP or your specialist doctor involved. So off to Dina. Dina, how did you get into cooking?
I've always loved to cook. Before I could even kind of get to the kitchen, I guess I was, you probably know, if you're from a South Asian family, you have pan, it's called a pandan, but where you have the pan and the beetle nut and leaf and everything. So I was cooking, pretending to cook with that since I was very young until I was allowed to go into the kitchen. So seriously, I would say my interest peaked when I was probably, like a lot of people, learned to make cupcakes at school. So baking from, 6, 7. So I really got into it probably, 6, 7, 8 around that time, baking cakes at home, things like, anything really. And I started cooking more South Asian food, probably from the age of 10, helping my mum in the kitchen. I'm the eldest out of 5, so a lot of that kind of responsibility fell on me, when I was growing up, to kind of help in the kitchen. And I naturally loved cooking, so I was always in the kitchen. So I guess it started from there. So I seriously started pursuing food writing probably only about 7, 8 years ago, but I've always cooked and written recipes. So it's something, and I've written freelance kind of fiction, non-fiction, as a kind of, I guess, a side job, I could call it. But so it kind of, both of those things I love, writing and food, combined several years ago.
That's excellent. Dina, I want to actually move on to some of your writing. actually links on quite seamlessly to what you just said. Obviously, the Brick Lane cookbook, and obviously our listeners will know Brick Lane is synonymous with the Bangladeshi community in London. Can you tell me more about the book and your favorite recipes and really what it means to you?
The book was, I would say, real labor of love. It's something that connected to my childhood memories. My dad used to be a tailor in the kind of leather factories, when I was growing up in the, before we came, and not when I was growing up in the 70s. I'm not that old, but so when I arrived in the UK in 1984 as a 4-year-old, so my age now, but so I used to go to the markets with my dad every Sunday, which was his day off, and just seeing everything around, the produce, the fresh kind of fruits, vegetables, ingredients, and that was a kind of a really strong memory for me. And we'd go and stop by this Pakistani cafe, actually Sweet and Spicy, which is no longer there, and a lot of people used to gather there and just have lunch. I remember kind of the sheikh kebabs and the gulab jamun they used to have during lunch every Sunday. So it used to be my thing to look forward to, and my time with my dad. So I think that kind of brought back fond memories, and also I guess shopping for provisions that we take home, and my mother would kind of create these amazing kind of meals for us with those things that we shopped. Yeah, so I guess it's kind of based on that, and also just celebrating the diversity of the immigrant cultures that kind of came to be living in Brick Lane and kind of or working in Brick Lane. As you know, probably that a lot of kind of Jewish kind of history, French Huguenots used to kind of live there and work there, with the textile mills and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just celebrating my memories and Bangladeshi cuisine and the Bangladeshi culture that kind of started kind of growing from the 70s onwards after the independence of Bangladesh in 71, but also celebrating the diversity of other immigrant cultures and populations in the area as well.
Okay. And in terms of, obviously, you talked about how the book came about and your interest in writing and your experience with your father. Moving a bit further on, you've now moved on to a YouTube channel. Can you tell us how that transpired?
Yes. It's something I guess I've wanted to do for a few years. I just didn't have the time, and as you're probably aware, for him, the book came out, I think, just over 2 years ago now. So since working on the book was a long process of about 2 years, so recipe testing, researching, going and meeting people that who contributed towards the book, market stall holders, restaurateurs, that kind of thing. So that kind of kept me busy for a good few years. And although I've done, a few things here and there, kind of video series on cookery, kind of things for a company called Yodomo. So I thought, it's something that I think sometimes, even though people read recipes, a lot of people everyone can connect basically with visuals, as we know, and everything's on YouTube these days. And sometimes, unless you're really into food and you're going and buying a cookery book or looking through recipes, you're not, maybe a lot of people aren't kind of, don't find it as accessible to go and do those things. So for someone like, I guess, my parents' generation or my aunts, uncles, sometimes they just, everyone goes on YouTube and looking at recipe videos and how people are cooking, they can follow without even having to kind of read anything or kind of go and buy that book. So I think it's also something that I wanted to do, just to kind of share the techniques, not just the recipes of Bangladeshi cuisine, which is quite distinct. Even though, a lot of things, people know as Indian food generally under one umbrella, but it's really not. You've got, diversity within that. You've got Pakistani food, which is very different to Bangladeshi food. And even within those countries, regional specialties, local specialties, there's such a varied kind of cuisine in each of those places. So for me, it was really just kind of show people how I cook at home. Obviously, a lot of the times, you guys probably, kind of understand that nothing's really measured at home when you grow up in a South Asian household. So I think that was a challenge when I started out in all of this, trying to measure things. Ask my mum, hold on, how much, how do I measure this? Well, how much of this? She said, put some of this and some of that until it's this color. So, how do you know something's ready? So it's kind of showing people, also just to trying to kind of, I guess, help people to be more confident and comfortable in the kitchen. And so you probably gathered by my YouTube channel, I try to keep things kind of specific in terms of ingredients, but sometimes I'll say 1 cup of this, or, just around this time, so people can see and watch me kind of cook and hopefully get used to kind of the basics of cooking, home cooking, and then kind of experiment. So it's not such a scary thing, that you have to follow everything to the letter. So that's probably one of my main reasonings behind it, as well as, I guess, during this lockdown, it's, incredibly difficult to kind of stay connected to people. And I thought this would be a nice way to not only stay connected to followers on social media, but also family and friends and people, since lockdown, not surprisingly, a lot of friends have been calling me family. How do you cook this? How do you make this? Can you give me some tips? So I'm like the go-to person. I thought this is a nice way of sharing things in a kind of, on one platform, basically.
You know what, Fahim, you've actually never taken me to a Bangladeshi restaurant.
I think we did in Burnley. Did we? Was that a Bangladeshi?
Oh no, yeah, it was. Yeah, it's that guy. What was his name? He had a plate of chilies, and I think that's a cultural thing, isn't it? And I think that there are parts of India that have like a small plate with onions and chilies, and this is something that they use to, I don't know, is it to sanitize a mouth or just kind of neutralize it? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not really a huge chili fan, surprisingly. I mean, my probably English friends can probably handle more spice than me, which is a bit embarrassing, but sometimes. But I think, it's more about the flavor than heat. And the heat is nice. Sometimes everyone, it's nice to have something spicy, but not to kind of burn your tongue off or, your taste buds. So chilies, it is a cultural thing. I've seen it in other kind of cultures as well. I mean, in some parts of India, they do that. In Pakistan, some of my Pakistani friends, it's big chilies and onions and but more kind of pickles, I guess, more lighter things, and maybe the chilies are milder. I don't know. But in Bangladeshi cuisine, not so much now, but I do remember more chilies appearing on the table when I was growing up. When people used to come over for dinner.
That's good. Shazli, I want to bring you in. You've been listening intently. What's your experiences of food cuisine and maybe growing up in your memories of traditional cuisine?
I think so. Very similar. My mum is a fantastic cook, and I sort of grew up watching her make all sorts of meals from scratch, and she's been forever trying to impart advice onto me and try and make me into a good cook, but I don't think I'm very much there yet. Very much this lockdown has, similar to quite a lot of people out there, has made me cook a lot more. Once you realize that you can't actually go out to eat as much, it's made me improve my cooking, and certainly I'm ringing my mum a lot more and calling upon her recipes and things to improve my cooking, and it's healthier as well. I think that's the underlying thing. Cooking at home overall is healthier than going out to eat, because you know what ingredients you're putting in. You're using the fresh ingredients, and you've got more control. One thing I agree with, I found it very difficult to learn to cook from my mum, because when you say how much do you put in of this, it's just you just have a look and you estimate. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. And then I'm like, how do I fix this? It's like, maybe add a little bit of this. But it's very difficult, because how do you know? So it's fantastic having the availability of YouTube and cookbooks, and actually cookbooks are fantastic to follow the recipes, but I think when you have YouTube and you can visually see somebody doing something, for me, I found that a lot easier, because a lot of times, a lot of the skills, sometimes if you're not cooking regularly, you don't know what the certain terminology means or how to do certain things. So it's a fantastic resource having people who actually are teaching us how to cook and make cuisines that we can only sort of aspire to have at home.
And I think that's where the coronavirus is kind of, the elephant in the room that's given us an opportunity to get back to those things, isn't it? Just actually spending time doing things collaboratively as a family, as you said, just taking away all those processed foods, a lot more about rich, ingredients and experimenting. I think a lot of people are experimenting, and I see a lot more things on Snapchat and things like that. So I think people seem to be enjoying when it comes to cooking in the current climate.
Yeah, definitely. I've enjoyed making some of Dina's recipes, so that's been good. Dina, moving on to obviously more practical things. Obviously, it's Ramadan. Many of our listeners following Ramadan meals. Is there anything you'd recommend in terms of suhoor or iftar?
I think, it's one of those things. I think Ramadan, unless you're very kind of dedicated and careful, people do tend to have, I guess, kind of more rich food. Maybe it's the kind of, treat towards the end of the day when you're fasting all day, and then you do kind of naturally opt for those things, especially if you've grown up in a community or culture where, you're that's what's available. But I think nowadays, people, I mean, I've definitely seen a change in kind of people, my generation or younger, just trying to do things differently, a little bit differently, and incorporate different things and be more health conscious. So I think without, there's plenty of things you can make without sacrificing on taste and flavor. And also, the specialness of iftar, gathering together, having kind of, specific foods that you eat during iftar. So, and recipe wise, I would say, things that are more high protein, I think it's fine totally to, I'm not one of those people who says, you have to have everything healthy. You can't have to cut this out, cut that out. Definitely not. I think you just have to have things in moderation and try and opt for things which are more grilled. So, you can have tandoori chicken tikka, which is oven food. You can have, baked potatoes, but with different toppings, more kind of South Asian toppings, if that's to your taste. Also, we have a thing, Fahim, you've probably seen on my social media, called khichuri in Bengali, but also khichdi, I guess in South Asia it's very popular, rice and lentil dish. So if you don't
Beautiful.
put that's just, like a classic, isn't it? It's simple. And that's the best. And it's always it's a staple during Ramadan in our homes anyway, in a lot of Bangladeshi homes, and I know many homes. And so those things you kind of temper at the end, or, you do tarka or bagara at the end, which you can leave those things out if you want to have a healthier option. So you don't have to add the ghee at the end, and just, add the kind of good stuff, turmeric, ginger. It's all kind of very nutritional. You've got lentils in there as well, pulses and grains. So I think always make sure to, in our family, always make sure to have a salad or something kind of with vegetables present on your table, and try and use a bit, more olive oils, cook things in the oven. Slow cooking is amazing. I think, especially during the long days and you don't have the time or the energy, just, saute some vegetables in a little bit of olive oil, season salt, pepper, you can put paprika in there, and then just kind of slow cook it for an hour, low temperature, and then give it a couple of stirs in between so they don't burn. And that's something that I made yesterday. So Middle Eastern inspired dishes are also very nice. And I guess in terms of sweets, I've got a sweet tooth, so it's like really terrible. Just try and have, if you do make things, and you make things family style, just because it's there. I think a lot of people, you're fasting and then you see everything on the table and you just completely go for it and dive in. So just, try and reduce the amount you eat all together at once. Sometimes, our eyes are hungrier than, our stomach. So you see things and you want to eat it, grab everything. So just kind of have things in batches. So after you have a kind of small, lighter iftar, and then have a bit of a break. And that's what I've been doing, not having like a giant meal when I break fast. And I think your stomach kind of shrinks, I guess, during the day you're not eating. And then, have a break. And then if you're still hungry, have another lighter meal. And then obviously have a light nutritional meal for suhoor. And one of my favorites is kind of having porridge. Porridge is great, in terms of the nutritional aspect. And you can add, bananas to it. They're very energizing, meals, recipes for porridge. You can add a little bit of honey, nuts and seeds, which are very good as well. So these are like slow energy release foods. So throughout the day, they'll keep you hydrated as well, and drink plenty of water, I would say. And reduce your salt a little bit if you can, because obviously, that kind of makes you want to have more water as well.
It's really good. I think we can go home now.
No, there's lots of nuggets of good practice in there, and but I always think that we all have some kind of responsibility as parents or children, brothers, sisters, in terms of making sure that we try to practice healthy eating habits, and especially as coming as your profession, being a chef and a writer, obesity is very commonly talked about. How do you try to address that from your role? And what are the opportunities for chefs and writers out there?
I think from my point of view, I haven't kind of specifically addressed it, but I do kind of, where I can, say that you can make things healthier if you want to, or you can kind of have, I try not to advocate kind of, treats, having, of course, on my social media, I do make treats a lot, and that's me baking. So if I bake something, I'm not eating it all by myself. So it's usually for, a big group or a family. I come from a large family. So I'd say in terms of addressing that, I think one of the key things is, I'm a real advocate of home cooking and cooking from scratch. So I think if you know what you're putting into your dishes that you're making, if you're not having those processed foods with things, not only the fat and the sugar and everything else and the salt, but also additives, which are really bad, for you, kind of unnatural ingredients. And those are the kind of, in a way, worse than having those other kind of natural kind of fats and sugars, equally bad. So I think it's trying to understand that cooking from home, however simple it may be, you don't have to, spend hours in the kitchen, but just trying to put simple meals together I talk about it with my cousin who's got kids, and, we constantly discuss about healthier options that she can cook for her, kids. She's got 3 kids, and it's, and even having a niece at home. I don't have children of my own, but I've got a little niece and we're conscious of what she's eating. So just making sure that, you can have a little treat, but making sure that you cook things from scratch, include vegetables and fruits into the meals, and also you're aware of how much. When you see, if you buy something from the shop, for instance, half a block of butter might go into it, but you're not going to see that butter. So when you're actually cooking with it, you see it. When you see those ingredients, pouring a bag of sugar, pouring a half a block of butter in things, you are most likely to kind of step back and say, hold on a second, this is a lot of stuff. And I've noticed that with people that I cook with. Sometimes I cook with my nieces, younger nieces sometimes, or my cousins, and they're like, oh, do you need this much sugar? You're pouring a lot of sugar in there, a lot of butter. I'm like, well, it's like, does this need this much? I said, well, that's why we're using this much, to kind of cut down, so they can see visually that we shouldn't be having a lot of fat and a lot of sugar, and if you do use it, use it according to the recipe, but then you're not having all of that to yourself. But if you buy that same thing, like, I don't know, maybe a cupcake from the shops, not always, but a lot of the times it can be double the amount of fat or additives or something, and it's not fresh. And I always think, I've been brought up with no junk food at home, very rarely. Until I was probably in my late teens, we didn't have like pizza and things, occasionally crisps and chocolates, but or fizzy drinks, none of that. So I think that's my kind of ethos, is kind of make things as much from scratch and try and learn from our elders as well. So I've learned a lot from my grandma and my mum. So, fermenting things at home, pickling things at home, making juices at home, all those things, what's going into your dishes. And it's important to know where the food comes from, how things are cooked. And I think that kind of helps people, educate people on the healthiness or, unhealthiness of a dish, I think. And that kind of helps towards kind of reducing how much we intake.
Shazli, I want to bring you in, Shazli. Obviously, there's been this issue of donut gate amongst the diabetologists of the UK and what kind of foods that they've been eating. Do you have any thoughts on, obviously, obesity and the foods that we should be promoting, both as healthcare professionals and general public life?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, obesity is on the rise and it's continuing to increase, and it's essentially a pandemic that we have going on with obesity, which eventually leads to people having more comorbidities, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol. So obesity is a big problem which we need to try and tackle, and it's happening younger. We're getting more childhood obesity as well. So this is behaviors that we need to try and sort of tackle earlier on. And as a parent, I suppose it does come down to us educating ourselves on what foods are healthier and how we should be sort of bringing up the younger generation, so that we can sort of in the future reduce the rise of obesity, because we don't want our younger generation getting obesity and the complications earlier. So we definitely do have a responsibility. Certainly, when we see people in clinic, we have dietitians, which we sort of use quite widespread. Most people who do come to clinic with type 2 diabetes are always offered dietitian care, and there's a lot of resources available to them now online as well as courses. So when people are diagnosed with diabetes, we try and get them on an education course, so that they learn about what they should be doing, what they should be eating, what does diabetes mean to them, what does obesity mean, what foods should you be eating, what's better, and what's not. So I think we definitely do have an important role to play with this, and certainly that's one. I know people ask quite a lot about it when they come to clinic, and we do need to be able to pass on that advice.
I think when we try to define obesity, just for listeners, because you may not know, we used an index called the body mass index. So any adult over a value of, say, 25 to less than 30 is deemed to be overweight, and any value over 30 and above is obese, and 40 is morbidly obese. So they look at your kilograms as well as your height to try and calculate that. But there is some criticism about whether that's the most effective measure of obesity, but certainly it's probably the most easily calculated, isn't it? And Shazli, you did mention an important point. I guess it's about modeling, isn't it? And if we look at the NHS data using the NHS Digital, about 60+% of women and 67 and above of men are deemed to be overweight. So that's a huge amount of the population. And I guess the key kind of age differences, or the at-risk age groups are between kind of 35 and 55. And that's when you're supposed to be active, you're supposed to be engaged in employmency. So there's lots of factors that you have to think about and reflect on, isn't there?
I think I'm conscious of the time, and Dina, I know you have to leave. So before we go on to the break, can I get a final message from you, Dina, for all our listeners on OAS 103.1 FM, and also how they can keep in touch with you after the program, details of your social media output, and really just some tips and takeaway home points for them, please.
Sure. I guess the main tips I would say, my main thing I would say is try and do as much home cooking as possible. I mean, now you've got a good reason to try and do that. Also, don't always go for the easy option. And I think, limiting junk food is kind of number one kind of must, I think, in my opinion. I very rarely buy junk food. So things like crisps, chocolates, ready-made things, if you cut that, automatically you'll be healthier if you cook at home and make simple meals. And things don't have to be lengthy. So just kind of, even if you're not confident or comfortable in the kitchen, just go and give it a shot and don't think about being a perfectionist. A lot of people, they think, I can't get this right, or I'm a bit scared. And I always get messages from people, I want to make this, but I'm a bit scared, or what if I mess it up? I think messing up is part of the way you learn, so don't worry about messing up. Just make something you like, or you're comfortable making. Start with noodles, whatever, instant noodles, but just add some veggies into it. Maybe not add a sachet of, fatty thing or whatever it is they have in it. So, if I do occasionally have them, I don't add the added things to the dish. And just experiment, have things that you normally wouldn't. A lot of people, surprisingly, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, they don't even know what certain vegetables look like. They don't know. I mean, they think, oh, is this what broccoli looks like? Because they've never had like a fresh vegetable, and I think it's important to know what there is out there. So just go and have a stroll. Obviously now you can't as much, but just have a look, what things you can incorporate into diets and test things out, because sometimes you might like something you haven't tried before and it's good for you, so do experiment. And I think it's just go for unrefined options as well, unrefined sugars and things like that, brown sugars, slightly healthier. You can go for honey, and try not to go for low fat things. I would say, low fat is usually full of additives again. So have something like, butter or ghee, but in moderation. Olive oil, healthy olive oil is a really good option, I'd say. Coconut oil. So go for these kind of healthier fats, and nuts and dried fruits and things, which are good. And drink lots of water. That's my number one mantra. I mean, I always drink like all of us, not now, but always drink like 2 glasses of water every morning without fail. For the last 15 years, I've done that. And throughout the day, like, water is important. And if you need to have vitamins, also get yourself checked out, by a doctor, health professional. I think that's the key important. A lot of, South Asians especially are lacking in vitamins and minerals, and, vitamin D especially. So get those things checked out, that can contribute towards you feeling kind of lethargic or, whatever the case is, iron. So yeah, just make sure that you're kind of nutritionally sound and also eating nutritionally as well. I hope that's something helpful for the audience. In terms of finding me, I'm at Dina's Food Story on Instagram, Twitter, and my YouTube is also called Dina's Food Story. So you can kind of follow me there, and I usually share a lot of food stuff, but also I do kind of think it's quite nice to engage with the audience as well. So if you have any food related questions, do get in touch that way as well, or on my website, which is dinabegum.co.uk.
That's great. Thanks for being on with us, Dina. It's just been, you've had a lot of wise words for the listeners as well as for us to internalize. So that's been very helpful. We hope to have you again on the show, perhaps doing a live cook-up session. I'm not sure, but we'll certainly try. But I hope you have a good Ramadan, and do keep in touch. So just for the listeners, the number again is 07522 723 455. So if you have any questions, please do get in touch. After the break, we're going to be looking at obesity and diabetes, which is a bigger problem.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks
Dina.
so much for having me.
Take
care and have a great Ramadan.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to MEDtalkx. As you're aware, we are joined by Dr. Shazli Azmi, who's a consultant in diabetes endocrinology, and we left the previous segment with that question: which is the bigger problem? Is it obesity or is it diabetes? What do you think, Shazli?
That's a very sort of broad question. I'm going to come back to one point quickly. We were talking about BMI earlier, with regards to what we need to aim for, and we sort of talked about anyone, generally speaking, when a BMI above 25 is classed as overweight. However, we must be aware that in the Asian population, this number is actually lower. So we need to be aiming for a BMI of 23. And in women, people's waist circumference should be less than 35 inches, and in men, less than 31.5 inches. I suppose the reason for this is that Asians at a lower BMI have more fat tissue, basically, so we're more at risk of developing complications, and hence the lower BMI. As to what is the bigger problem, they both go hand in hand, and the reason why diabetes is on the rise is because obesity is also on the rise. I suppose a couple of facts: 80% of people with type 2 diabetes are obese, but only 10% of obese people develop type 2 diabetes. So with regards to with obesity, type 2 diabetes is just one of the complications. I mentioned earlier there's many others. So your overall health will be impaired. You're more at risk of earlier heart attacks, earlier strokes. The cholesterol, it kind of goes in hand. Cholesterol tends to be higher, blood pressure tends to be higher, and all this will affect your cardiovascular health. And not just having diabetes, but if you have diabetes on top of it, that puts you at even greater risk. So the obesity itself has many issues. Also, generally on your fitness. So, for example, if you're obese and, like you said, people sort of in the working age group, you're not as mobile. You're going to get arthritis early. Your joints going to hurt. You're not as physically able to do exercise, and this is going to get into your quality of life. So, obesity is. I wouldn't say more important, but that is the precursor to the rise in diabetes. If we can improve, get people to exercise more, lose weight, the incidence of diabetes eventually would go down as well, overall.
That's really helpful, Shazli. I want to come on to, obviously, what you specialize in, diabetic neuropathy and clinics. For the listeners out there who may have had their clinics cancelled or changed to a telephone call, what have you noticed in terms of your workforce planning and how you're managing diabetes in the community now?
Absolutely. So as we know, with COVID-19 going on at the moment, a lot of routine clinics have been cancelled. And well, not cancelled, they're rearranged. We're doing a lot more sort of telephone conversations, e-consults and stuff. On the whole, I think this is a move forward for for how we do clinics as a whole. The whole world's kind of moved towards sort of remote working and remote work generally, and use of technology. And I feel somewhat in diabetes we weren't doing that as much. Hopefully, this has given us a chance to test the water as how that works. So we'll know with time how that's fed back from patients and how they received that. But so far, the benefits are that from telephone conversations, we can obviously maintain the continuity of care without the face-to-face consultations. There obviously are benefits to seeing somebody in person. He mentioned one of my interests is diabetic neuropathy, and for that we obviously need to examine people's feet and we need to look at them. So there's certain things that you have to do face to face, and hopefully with time that will get picked up on once people can come back into clinic. But it's really important that if you obviously because we can't do it, that patients do keep an eye on their feet, because one of the main problems with having high blood sugar is obviously it can affect your eyes. So the retinopathy screening is important. It can affect your kidneys, but it also affects the nerves in your feet. And a lot of people will get pain in their feet because of nerve damage. And as it's progressed, they might even get numbness. And that's essentially saying that, there's quite a lot of nerve damage there. So whilst we may not be able to examine them, it's really important that you look at your feet. Make sure that there's no, that they're well hydrated. Keep moisturizing them. The first sign of nerve damage is when you get really dry feet. So try and make sure that that's moisturized, especially your heels and stuff. Always have a look to make sure that there's no cracks, no areas that can be exposed to infection, and if there is anything, make sure that that's covered, so it's not getting worse, especially like footwear. So if you've got blisters in certain areas, so have a look at what footwear you're wearing. And that's something that we won't be able to do sort of by a telephone consultation. So that's something that patients should be ideally doing in their own home. Telephone consultations also rely a lot more on people giving us information as to what they're doing with regards to how the blood sugars are, and we may not be able to have blood tests as readily available. So it kind of is a two-way process, but so far seems to be going okay. But we'll obviously see how sort of this translates with sort of the hard endpoints with how diabetes control changes over time.
So with the current issue with coronavirus, why is it, and perhaps some listeners would benefit from knowing, why is it that people with diabetes are more vulnerable to getting, say coronavirus or other infections?
So when you have diabetes, you're generally more predisposed to getting any infections. And this is because this is poorly controlled diabetes. If your blood sugars are high, you're more susceptible to getting infections because of the sort of weakened immune response. And people with diabetes will know that if you, for example, get a cut, or if you get something, like, especially sort of lower down your feet, it takes a lot longer to heal. And this is the result of your high blood glucose in the body that delays wound healing and impairs healing generally. So this is a worry. One of the worries is for people with diabetes who do get COVID-19 is that they tend to be get worse, more they have worse disease, more critical illness, and sort of worse outcomes. It's really important that we do control our blood sugars and try and get on top of our diabetes control, so that this is not the case, and we try to improve any chances that we do have of recovering from the disease.
So we've got a few questions coming thick and fast, Shazli, so maybe we can go to that. I just want to mention at this point that individuals need to consult their personal GPs before changing any medication, and to bear that in mind. So we've got a question from a listener, Nelson, if you're happy to take it, Shazli. If someone has diabetes but wants to fast, would you recommend this or not? Quite a broad question. Also, if they are taking medication in the middle of the day, how can this be changed due to fasting?
Yes, so that's a good question. So this is a question we get asked all the time. Should someone fast? Should they not fast? And obviously, it's a very personal choice. There's certain people that you'd be, if someone's got well-controlled diabetes, they're either on no medication or they're on like sort of 1 or 2 tablets, then generally speaking, it should be fine to fast. If someone's got any complications, diabetes, certainly if you've got type 1 diabetes, you shouldn't be fasting. If anyone's on insulin, then these are all triggers that would sort of suggest that perhaps you shouldn't be fasting and need to rethink it. The ideal situation is that before Ramadan, maybe about sort of 6 to 8 weeks before, you consult your GP or your diabetologist and ask and discuss with them, am I safe to fast? What risks do I have? And we will be able to advise you accordingly. Every individual is different. Diabetes UK has got quite good resources with regards to patients that we advise should or shouldn't fast, and kind of puts them into a traffic light system of red, amber, green. So red, you should definitely not fast. So this is people with type 1 diabetes, anybody who's got poorly controlled diabetes with an HbA1c above 75, anyone with complications, anyone who's been in hospital with diabetes, you certainly shouldn't be fasting. Then you've got the sort of the green, where really well-controlled diabetes on maybe 1 or 2 medications or no medication, and you've got no complications, in which case it's probably safe for you. And then there's sort of the middle range, and it's those people that ideally you need to be discussing with your GP or your diabetologist with regards to what's safe for yourself. It's very long at the moment, the days. So if you are on medication that will lower your blood sugar, it is likely that it will sort of potentially drop during the day. Medication-wise, this can be adjusted. So depending on what people are on, some people may be on medication with the lunch. So obviously not having lunch, so this can either be changed to iftar time or suhoor time, or the doses can be changed. But again, this is very individualized. So it depends what you're taking and what doses you're on as to how this can be altered. But certainly, that's something to be discussed before Ramadan, so that can be optimized. I'm going to a few sort of safety things. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I guess, is it fair to say the risk is a lot greater if you're on insulin as opposed to tablets for your diabetes? Or is that just too broad a brush to paint?
So it depends what tablet. So generally we know things like metformin don't cause hypoglycemia. So if you're just on metformin, that tends to be fine. However, medication like glycoside can lower the blood sugars. There's newer classes of medication like SGLT2 inhibitors, which we advise people to stop when they're fasting because the way this medication works, it gets rid of sugar in the urine and can cause more dehydration. So certainly if you're on that, that should be stopped if you're fasting. Again, this is something that needs to be reviewed with your GP depending on what your blood sugar is, because you don't want to stop things and your sugars go sky high. The other that we find is it's not necessarily so obviously when people are on insulin, you're after about 8 hours of fasting, your body goes into starvation mode. So you're using your fats and breaking down to try and sort of maintain your glucose. If we're giving somebody anything like insulin, there's a risk of hypoglycemia. So certainly if you are on insulin and you're fasting, you need to be checking your blood sugars regularly. And remember, this doesn't invalidate your fast. In fact, you need to be doing this to make sure you're fasting safely. So we say sort of first thing in the morning, a couple of hours after starting your fast to check your blood sugar, and then sort of regularly through. If you get a blood sugar of less than 4, you need to break your fast because you're going to go hypoglycemic. Similarly, if you've got a blood sugar above 16, you need to break your fast because it's too high. So as long as your blood sugars are maintained within that, broadly speaking, and obviously you're safe to fast, then you would continue. And if you feel unwell at all, you need to break your fast. Any dizziness, any symptoms of hypoglycemia, it's best to be safe so that potentially you can continue fasting later, and there's no harm to your health.
Yeah, that's good. We've got more questions coming in, Shazli. Can someone who has diabetes have dates at both suhoor and iftar, or will this affect their diabetes sugar levels too much?
Can somebody have dates? Is that the question?
That's right. Yeah, for both suhoor and iftar. Obviously, it's the tradition of the Prophet to break your fast with that, but they're asking, they obviously enjoy dates quite a lot, this individual perhaps. They're asking if they can have that both times.
So no pressure there, trying to break a sunnah there, Shazli.
Yeah, Shazli, you see the way I did that?
Dates are fantastic. I'm actually going to go with dates is a fantastic way to open your fast. Again, it's sunnah, but also it's rich in sort of a lot of vitamins and minerals and natural sugar. So it's a fantastic way to open your fast. How many dates is the question? So that's obviously open to interpretation. I wouldn't be having loads of dates. So I mean, sunnah's 3, I suppose. Cap it actually, and have some. You can have some for suhoor and iftar as long as it's in moderation. If you're having like 10 to 15 dates, then no. But as long as you're having it with moderation at both, it's absolutely fine to have that. As I said, it's a very sort of densely packed, nutritious thing to have, as long as it's obviously within moderation.
I think that's important. You mentioned moderation, and I think many people do have this fasting feasting thing, isn't it, where they really go all out at iftar time with a colourful spread. We mentioned that in the first section. I mean, you perhaps work with dietitians to try and help people with this. Any tips for people out there to try and prevent that happening?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, after 8 hours of fasting, your body goes into starvation mode and your metabolism slows down. So it's our body's way of coping with fasting. So once it gets to iftar time, you don't need to eat your whole day's quantity of food because your metabolism is slowed down. You just need to have what you need for one meal. And one of the main issues with diabetes is that it's not just the hypoglycemia during the day, which a lot of people are fine with. It's that massive meal that people have, rich of carbohydrates and fat foods, that cause a massive spike in your sugar after iftar time. And that is one big issue, because that then doesn't come down and you feel more unwell with it. And it obviously, having such a high blood sugar leads to more risks. So I would say your body will crave a lot of carbohydrates because obviously you're in starvation mode. So you will crave your carbohydrates, fatty, oily foods. But you just need to try and make sure that you obviously open with dates and then have a nutritious meal. I think Dina touched on quite a bit as to what is healthy and how to make things make things better. And sort of try and have all the food groups as a whole. I think it was sort of what I'd say in clinic: make sure that you've got a third of your plate is full of fruit and veg, a third is carbs, and a third is protein. I suppose that's a simple way of looking at it. So you are getting all the food groups. Keep hydrated, drink sort of as much as you can throughout the evening, and also foods like yogurts and things which have got natural fluids in them, so that will help with hydration.
So what about those foods that say no added sugars, but they're replaced with a lot of sweeteners? would you promote the use of artificial sweeteners in food items as opposed to, you know?
The use of artificial sweeteners is interesting. So it's it depends how you're using it. If you have two sugars in your tea and you're trying to reduce weight, you're trying to improve your diabetes, or you know, as I said, like if you're overweight and trying to bring it down and you want to cut down your sugar and you replace it with a sweetener, then the use of that's where it should be used. That's fine. Again, it comes to moderation. So sweeteners are a good way of improving, reducing sugar content in food while maintaining sweetness. However, we can't go overboard with it. As long as using it in moderation to try and have an aim of reducing your sugars, then that's fine. But we shouldn't be totally replacing it with loads of sweeteners just to make things just as sweet, because again, sweetness is not a natural product. So there's always sort of controversy coming out with those as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people should keep referring to food items to the glycemic index, shouldn't they, in terms of what's good? Because, you know, I guess it's every food item is rated, you know, that has a nutritional value is rated between 0 and 100. You're probably the professional in this, but sugar is 100. So the lower the number, the better it is. Yeah. In essence. So yeah, we've got some more questions coming in. There is a message from a brother in Blackburn. He's saying about cold and fizzy drinks. So he was reading that having cold and fizzy drinks straight after opening the fast can cause damage to your lungs. Is there any truth in this?
I've not come across a link between that and damage to your lungs. So cold and fizzy, I suppose we're talking about sort of just a cold drink that's like water or something, fine. If you're talking about cold fizzy drinks, again, anything in moderation. We shouldn't really be having full fat Coke, especially if you've got diabetes or overweight. That's not a healthy drink generally. But the link would be more towards obesity and diabetes, and not come across anything to do with the lungs. I don't know, what do you guys, Fahim, I suppose it's something that you've come across.
I couldn't say there's any truth to that at all that I know of. We've got another question as well. Perhaps you can answer. Do people who have diabetes have a higher risk of dying from the coronavirus? A bit of a morbid question, but it's relevant to people listening.
Well, I guess that's from a brother in Huddersfield.
Yeah. So the answer to that, it is a morbid question, and the answer is, if you've got diabetes, you've got coronavirus, you have got a higher chance of dying, yes. Not to say the majority of people, is not to say that you know people are going to pass away with it. Obviously, there's certain risk factors that make people who are diagnosed with COVID-19 do worse, and one of them is sort of diabetes. And we know that as we're learning more about COVID-19, we know that this does cause a rise in your blood sugars, not just in patients with diabetes, but also without. For some reason, it causes a massive causes a increase in blood glucose, so this needs to be managed. It also causes more insulin resistance, so we're finding people needing a lot more insulin in patients that are on it. However, there are people that are doing well with this as well, so it's just a matter of trying to make sure that you keep your diabetes controlled and keep your fitness as optimal as you can. It is a risk factor, but it's people are managing it as well. So
that's good. We're coming rapidly near the end, Shazli. I always like to ask the guests for maybe a top 3 tips or just take-home points for the audience that would really be useful if they've got diabetes, or even to prevent diabetes or have pre-diabetes, any of these things. What would you suggest for them?
So my top 3 tips. So one would be to, especially in the current climate, is to try and keep your weight controlled. Even if you don't have diabetes, try and maintain your weight, try and do exercise, try and get to a good fitness level, and this will put you in the best situation to tackle anything. And it will also prevent you from getting complications such as diabetes later on in the life. Will reduce your chances. If you are above 40 and you are overweight, you've got a strong family history of diabetes, then it's important that you get yourself tested for diabetes. go to your GP and ask for and get sort of this investigated, because there's a lot of people who are undiagnosed with diabetes, and even similarly pre-diabetes, and people can get complications at this early stage. One of the biggest issues is the undiagnosed patients undiagnosed diabetes having complications because they're just not picked up, because you may be in your early 40s and all of a sudden everything sort of slows down and you're just at more risk of things, and you don't necessarily seek advice until you've had diabetes. You go one day and you've had it for 10 years, you're not even known. So certainly if you are at risk, if you are overweight, if there's any concerns, then do get this checked out so that you are investigated and diagnosed if needed earlier, or just put on the right track. And I suppose my third tip would be, if you have got diabetes and you are fasting or you want to fast, then please seek advice from your GP or diabetologist as to how to do this safely. There's no reason why a lot of people can't fast. It's just to make sure that you're doing it safely. So check your blood sugars regularly and make sure that you're in the optimal health so that you can do well.
Oh, that's good. I want to make a quick shout out to Gillian Wood. She's from Filed Scrub Hub, and she's been very kind. As we may know, across the country, there are many volunteers who have been making gowns and scrubs for both key workers, doctors, nurses, and so on. And she actually looks after it in the near locality to me, and she's made it for me. So if you're listening, Gillian, many thanks for doing a great job out there. The NHS really appreciates it. In terms of next week, we have a couple more new guests. We have Keith Martin, who's involved in environmental work, council work, and is a card-carrying photojournalist as well, he tells me, amongst many hats that he has. And also we have our good friend Peter Rees. He's a personal resilience coach they're both due to join us at the same time. It's 5 to 6 p.m. here on Awaz 103.1 FM, and that's on the 9th of May. Over to you, Mehran.
Yeah, so couple of things. Do follow us on Facebook on MEDtalkx podcast. So that's MEDtalkx with an X, and also there is a YouTube channel. So after we get the video updated and loaded up, please do visit us and subscribe. It'd be very good and support our endeavors. Everyone's taking their time, and we appreciate Shazli and Dina to share their time. And I guess the Ramadan is a period of opportunity, so there's a lot of spiritual fulfillment that you can embark on, but at the same time, do remember that your body has a right over you as well. So eat well, drink well, sleep well. I think the sleep is a very prominent thing. So those are my kind of final take-home messages.
I think that's really important in terms of actually keeping that whole holistic therapy and holistic health really important. I think in terms of diabetes, obviously, Shazli, if we had more time, we'd speak much more longer on this topic. It's a really, really important topic for the community out there, and especially with the NHS having such a big budget as part of diabetes management. So it is really important to everyone out there. I think just to reiterate everything that's been said, what you said, keeping your weight healthy and trying to actually have the moderation with the meals. And I'm guilty as much as anyone else. That's really hard when it comes to iftar time. So I hope other people have better self-discipline than I do. Great. On that good note, I want to put my thanks out and convey my full wholehearted thanks to you, Shazli, as well. And obviously, Dina, if she's still listening and left behind. And I wish you all a very good Ramadan for the time being, and hope to listen to all our listeners again next week at the same time, 5 to 6 p.m., 9th of May, 2020 on Awaz 103.1 FM. I've been Fahim Shakur, along with my co-host, Mehran Javid. Many thanks, and listen and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.